A wonderful service, beautifully chosen, and although there was a wonderful reaction from the crowd outside, there's often at the end of a funeral a little moment of emotional release, and it came inside the cathedral as the doors opened and people heard the cheers from outside and people looked up and smiled, and there was a wonderful feeling of collective achievement, of being part of something, of history, as T.S. Eliot put it in the poem that the Bishop quoted another part of history being now and England. There was a little vignette that I heard about the lady's last days. It was reported that the last thing she had watched on television was Songs of Praise. And there's a certain aptness there. She was not somebody who watched a lot of television. She appeared on it a lot more than she sat before it. But I know that she enjoyed that programme because I once made the terrible mistake of trying to have small talk with her. She'd come, it was when I was a lead writer at the Telegraph, and she'd come to have lunch with us, and determined not to ask her a sententious question about public policy, I instead nervously blurted out, "Is there anything worth watching at the moment on television, Lady Thatcher?" And she swung round and fixed her intense blue gaze on me, trying to remember who I was. Part of my problem is that about a year before that, at a book launch, while making an expansive conversational point, I thumped her on the elbow. She was, of course, the soul of grace. "Don't worry, dear, don't worry, we're quite all right." But I had to say that ever since then, she had slightly flinched in my presence. And although she could never quite put her finger on who I was, she was always a little bit nervous when I hove into her line of sight. So she stared at me for a bit, and then she softened, and she said, "Well, we watch the Sunday evening programmes, dear, but you know, although we enjoy the Methodist hymns, we find that even they're getting a bit wishy-washy." Now, it was often said of the lady that she had no chit-chat. And that's true. But that's simply another way of saying that she took even the smallest things very seriously. Now, when you apply that to Songs of Praise, the outcome is pathetic. But when you apply it to the rescue of a great country, it is what we need. People have forgotten, and I suspect a lot of people in this room are too young to remember, the condition in which we found ourselves immediately before she took office. I read somewhere, one or two of you can remember, okay. I think there's been a kind of, okay, the Wintertons can remember, but I think there's been a kind of a collective amnesia about this. I read somewhere, obviously I don't know whether this is true, one of the ladies here can tell me, but I read somewhere that women forget the precise experience of childbirth. This is nature's way of propagating the species. You can't exactly remember what it was like, or you wouldn't try it ever again. I think we've done a similar thing when it comes to remembering the sheer awfulness of the breakdown of the Wilson Heath period. The 3-day week, the prices and incomes policies, a Conservative government in our lifetime decreeing by law what you were allowed to price your goods at and how much you were allowed to earn. This was an era when we had trade union barons as better known household names than cabinet ministers. Inflation peaked at 27%. We had power cuts. We had shortages. We were abolishing our counties. We were abolishing our old currency. We were signing away our independence by joining the common market. That was the depth of our despair. And what I can just remember from that period, my first clear political memory is the 1979 election, and I can just hazily recall the calamity that had preceded it. But what sticks in my mind was hearing adults casually saying, "England has gone to the dogs. We're finished." As Henry Kissinger put it, Britain is reduced to begging, borrowing and praying until the North Sea oil receipts come in. A headline in the Wall Street Journal was even blunter: "Goodbye Great Britain, it was nice knowing you." That was the almost universal view of the political establishment from left to right. And she absolutely wouldn't accept the consensus. I can't bear Britain in decline, she said. I just can't bear it. And by sheer force of will, she turned things around. In the 1960s and 1970s, we had been outperformed economically by every country in Europe. Every country in Europe except Spain, which was bouncing back from an even lower place. In the 1980s, it was the other way around. We were the strongest growing economy. Standards of living in the UK in the 1980s rose 27%. In Europe, by 2%. In North America, there was a slight fall. That was the magnitude of her achievement. She loosed the natural enterprise of a free people. She moved the rocks and allowed the grass to grow. And people now talk. I want to reach for my revolver every time I hear someone saying she was a divisive politician. How many party leaders today have come close to getting the percentages of the popular vote that she habitually... Although given the nature of modern communications, we are naturally paying a lot of attention to the nauseating antics of a handful of half-wits. I think a lot of people of the broad centre-left, people who opposed her while she was Prime Minister, now have the broad-mindedness and the generosity to acknowledge that much of what she did was brave and right. There was a similar process of economic transformation throughout the industrial world. It couldn't have been avoided, and the way we carried it out here left us once again in the front rank of nations of the world. Those who can't forgive her find her very success to be the unpardonable offence. She never lost an election to them. She took a country that was ruined, indebted and dishonoured, and she left it confident, prosperous and free. What was the issue that she was brought down over? You know, of course there were a number of factors, there was the poll tax and so on, but what was the trigger that moved a number of MPs and a number of foreign leaders to join in a push against her? She didn't think the United Kingdom should join the Euro. Well, knowing what we now know, who called that one right? There are never any prizes for being right in politics too early, except the virtue of knowing that your achievement lasted. She was right on that issue, and now in retrospect, a number who opposed her at the time